An elderly cardinal is mocked in conclave for his age, until he is elected pope in a historic vote. Looks of disdain and barely disguised laughter followed Cardinal Joseph through the corridors of the conclave, as he walked with slow steps, leaning on his cane. None of those proud cardinals could imagine that in just 5 days, they would all be kneeling before the old man they considered too weak to lead the church. Stick around until the end, and don't forget to subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Cardinal Joseph Miller walked slowly through the marble corridors of the Apostolic Palace, his soft steps echoing almost imperceptibly against the secular walls. At 87, he was the oldest among the American cardinals summoned to the extraordinary conclave that would choose the successor to Pope Gregory XII, who had died unexpectedly after only 3 years of pontificate. Joseph had completely white hair and a slightly curved posture, the result of decades dedicated to reading and studying the scriptures. His hands, marked by time, trembled slightly as he held his worn breviary. The conclave had been exceptionally transferred to St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, an unprecedented decision in the modern history of the Church, justified by the need to bring the papal selection process closer to Catholic communities around the world. It was the first time such an event had taken place outside the Vatican in more than 6 centuries. Unlike his colleagues who arrived in limousines and official cars, Joseph had insisted on using the subway. Dressed in a simple black cassock and a worn coat, few recognized the Cardinal of Milwaukee, known for his austere life and dedication to the poorest. "Allow me to help you with your luggage, Eminence," offered a young secretary upon noticing Joseph discreetly entering through a side door of the cathedral. "Thank you, son, but this small suitcase contains all I need," Joseph replied with a gentle smile. "At my age, I've learned that we need very little to live with dignity." The preliminary meeting room was filled with cardinals from around the world, many surrounded by advisors and secretaries. Animated conversations in various languages filled the environment, interrupted only by the tinkling of crystal glasses and the murmur of carefully calculated political discussions. Cardinal Thomas Reynolds from Boston, a 62-year-old man known for his eloquence and influential connections in the Vatican, commanded the attention of a significant group of European and Latin American prelates, tall, athletic in build, with perfectly trimmed gray hair. Reynolds personified the image of the modern leader that many believed was necessary to face the contemporary challenges of the Church. "We need renewed vision and energy to revitalize our global mission," Reynolds declared with conviction. "The Church cannot continue anchored in obsolete traditions." Joseph approached the group silently, interested in the discussion. Reynolds briefly interrupted his speech, casting a look of recognition followed by an almost imperceptible rolling of his eyes. "Ah, Cardinal Miller, good that you could join us. I hope the trip wasn't too tiring for you," commented Reynolds, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The journey was peaceful, thank you," Joseph responded serenely. "We were just discussing the need for dynamic and innovative leadership," continued Reynolds, subtly emphasizing the words, "someone capable of facing long diplomatic journeys and mastering the complexities of modern digital communication." Restrained laughter arose among some of those present. Cardinal Moretti, a 58-year-old Italian and considered one of the most promising papabili, added with false kindness, "Of course, we enormously value the wisdom of our more experienced brothers. Perhaps they can advise us from the tranquility of their libraries, while the younger ones face the storms." Joseph merely smiled, his blue eyes conveying a serenity that contrasted with the environment charged with ambitions. "The most difficult storms are not always those we see on the horizon, but those we carry within us," he responded softly before moving away toward an empty seat. Accommodations for the cardinals had been prepared in an exclusive annex of the cathedral, with comfortable rooms and amenities worthy of their position. However, when Joseph arrived at his designated room, He discovered that it was located at the end of a long corridor near the service areas, significantly smaller than the others. "We apologize for the inconvenience, Eminence," explained the logistics coordinator, a nervous young cleric. "There was a last-minute change in the distribution. Cardinal Reynolds thought you might prefer a more quiet room, considering your age." Joseph observed the simple space: a narrow bed, a small desk, and a crucifix on the wall. The walls showed moisture stains, and the heating worked precariously. "This room will remind me of my first years as a missionary priest in the mountains of Peru," Joseph responded with a genuine smile. "It will be perfect to maintain my concentration on the truly important things of this conclave." During the formal dinner that night, Joseph noticed that his place was at the furthest end of the main table, almost hidden behind a large floral arrangement. Cardinal Reynolds occupied the center, next to the Camerlengo, the cardinal in charge of administering the church during the vacant seat. "Miller is so far away that we'll need binoculars to see him," commented Cardinal Moretti in a low voice to the French cardinal seated at his side, provoking discreet laughter. Joseph ate silently, observing the alliances being formed and the strategies being outlined between whispers and significant handshakes. Occasionally, a young African or Asian cardinal tried to initiate a conversation with him, only to be quickly attracted to another group by some more influential prelate. At the end of the meal, when the cardinals were invited to briefly share their expectations for the conclave, Reynolds suggested, "Perhaps we should start with the youngest, since they will have more time to implement the vision we choose," provoking a new wave of contained smiles. The Camerlengo, a fair man, intervened. "We will follow tradition from the most experienced to the youngest. Cardinal Miller, please." Joseph rose with some difficulty, discreetly supporting himself on the table. His gaze swept over the attentive faces, some genuinely interested, others merely tolerant. "I come to this conclave with a single prayer, that the Holy Spirit help us see beyond our own ambitions and human limitations," he said in a soft but clear voice, "that we may choose not the most eloquent, the strongest, or the most popular, but the one who can best serve as a shepherd of souls." A brief silence followed, soon filled by Reynolds' imposing voice, which quickly redirected the conversation to practical and strategic issues. The following morning, preparatory committees were formed to organize thematic discussions before the formal start of the conclave. Cardinal Reynolds, naturally assuming leadership, announced the composition of the main committee, strategically including representatives from different continents and theological currents, all recognizably aligned with his modernizing vision. "I believe we have achieved a perfect balance between experience and innovation," declared Reynolds, as the names were projected on a screen. "These brothers will adequately represent our diverse perspectives." A young Filipino cardinal timidly raised his hand. "Allow me to observe that Cardinal Miller is not on any of the committees," he pointed out. "His experience in interreligious dialogue could be valuable, especially considering his years as a consultant to the Pontifical Council." Reynolds smiled condescendingly. "We appreciate your concern, Eminence. However, we decided not to overburden our venerable brother with administrative tasks. Cardinal Miller certainly needs time for rest and prayer." Several cardinals nodded in apparent agreement. Joseph, sitting quietly in his place, showed no reaction. During the coffee break, Cardinal Moretti approached Joseph with false solicitude. "It's really admirable your presence here, Eminence. At your age, I would probably have requested a dispensation from the conclave. The travel, the meetings, it must be extremely exhausting." "Age brings physical limitations, certainly," Joseph responded calmly. "But it also offers certain advantages." "Such as?" asked Moretti, with disguised curiosity. "Patience," Joseph answered simply. and the ability to distinguish between what is urgent and what is important. Moretti laughed as if he had heard a polite joke and quickly moved away upon seeing Reynolds waving to him from a nearby group. Later, during discussions about the contemporary challenges of the church, Joseph raised his hand several times to contribute, but the moderator, a close ally of Reynolds, consistently ignored his gestures. When he finally recognized his presence, after insistence from some younger cardinals, he limited his speaking time to just 2 minutes, citing agenda restrictions. "I'll be brief," Joseph began. "I would just like to remind everyone that before being administrators, diplomats, or communicators, we are shepherds of souls. Any reform or initiative that does not put the salvation of souls first will only be—" "Thank you, Eminence," interrupted the moderator as he rang a small bell. "Unfortunately, your time is up. We need to move on to the next topics." On the eve of the closing of the preparatory meetings, an informal session was traditionally held where cardinals could express concerns and hopes before the ritual silence of the conclave. The session took place in the historical library of the cathedral, an elegant space with dark oak shelves and stained glass that filtered the evening light. Cardinal Reynolds, with his rhetorical ability, dominated the discussion, articulating a vision of a renewed church, adapted to the demands of the contemporary world. His supporters strategically complemented his points, creating the impression of a growing consensus. "We need a leader who understands digital language, capable of speaking to new generations," declared a German cardinal. "Someone with vigor to undertake frequent international travel," added another. Cardinal Moretti, noticing Joseph's absence, commented with false concern, "It seems our older brother could not join us tonight. I hope he is well." "I am present, Eminence," responded Joseph's serene voice, emerging from a partially shadowed corner of the library. "I merely preferred to listen attentively before speaking." Reynolds could not completely hide his irritation at the interruption of the carefully orchestrated moment. "Cardinal Miller, it's good that you could join us. We were discussing the requirements for effective leadership in the modern world." "Yes, I could hear," Joseph responded calmly. "And I would like to add a perspective, if you'll allow me." A polite silence, more of tolerance than genuine interest, established itself in the room. Joseph rose slowly. "I have observed with attention the discussions of these days," he began. "I have heard much about communication strategies, structural reforms, international diplomacy, and technological adaptations. All important issues, no doubt." He paused, his eyes scanning the attentive faces. "However, I haven't heard much about prayer, humility, or about being a servant of the servants of God, the true title of the Pope. We talk about leadership as if we were choosing a CEO, not a shepherd." Some cardinals moved uncomfortably in their seats. Joseph continued, "Before being administrators of the institution, we are guardians of souls. Our main concern should not be with public image, growth statistics, or cultural relevance, but with fidelity to the gospel and care for the most vulnerable." Reynolds tried to intervene. "Certainly these concerns are not mutually exclusive, Eminence. We can be faithful to tradition while adapting to contemporary realities." "Indeed," agreed Joseph, "but the order of priorities matters. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." "I fear we are inverting this equation." An African cardinal, usually silent, spoke up in support. "Cardinal Miller raises a fundamental question that perhaps we have neglected in our discussions." The tension in the environment was palpable. Reynolds, with diplomatic skill, thanked Joseph for his contribution and quickly redirected the conversation to practical aspects of the conclave procedure. At the end of the meeting, as the cardinals dispersed, some young prelates discreetly approached Joseph. expressing agreement with his words and seeking advice. The day dawned with a fine mist enveloping St. Patrick's Cathedral, as if a mysterious veil separated the sacred space from the outside world. The 21 cardinal electors, duly adorned with their scarlet vestments, solemnly entered the area adapted for the conclave while the choir intoned the Veni Creator Spiritus. The massive door was ritually closed and sealed, isolating the princes of the church from the outside world until a decision was reached. In the environment prepared for the election, a perfect replica of the Sistine Chapel had been recreated, including the traditional procedures and strict secrecy. Joseph occupied his designated place, significantly distant from the central places where Reynolds and his allies strategically positioned themselves. During the introductory meditation, conducted by a Spanish cardinal of theological renown, Joseph kept his eyes closed in deep contemplation. "Observe how fragile he looks," whispered Cardinal Moretti to a colleague nearby. "I doubt he would last a week in the papacy. He probably can't even read the names on the ballots without help," commented another in a low voice, provoking disguised smiles. The voting ritual began after the preliminary prayers. Each cardinal, in order of precedence, approached the altar holding his completed ballot, pronounced the established oath, and deposited the vote in the urn. When it was Joseph's turn, he walked slowly, discreetly supporting himself on the benches. Reynolds exchanged significant looks with his allies, as if confirming Joseph's physical inadequacy for any function beyond symbolic presence. The first vote, as was traditional, served more as a mapping of the present forces. The results, announced after the meticulous count, showed Reynolds with 47 votes, Moretti with 32, the African Cardinal Ntumba with 22, and the remaining votes distributed among minor candidates. Joseph received only 2 votes. "As expected," commented a Brazilian cardinal to a colleague. "The first votes are just signals. The real negotiation begins now." During the interval between votes, groups naturally formed for strategic discussions. Joseph remained in his place, apparently absorbed in prayer. Occasionally, a younger cardinal approached him briefly, exchanging a few words before returning to the more influential circles. That night, after the second scrutiny that maintained similar results, Joseph was walking silently through the corridors of the conclave when he heard exalted voices coming from a small meeting room. The door was ajar. "We need to consolidate our votes by tomorrow," Reynolds was saying emphatically. "If Moretti doesn't yield now, we run the risk of a prolonged impasse." "And what about the African and Asian bloc?" asked a voice with a German accent. "We're offering specific guarantees for their regions. 5 new cardinals for Africa in the first consistory, expanded funding for seminaries in Asia. The usual." Joseph moved away silently, disturbed not by the practice of negotiations, an inevitable part of ecclesiastical politics, but by the transactional nature and absence of spiritual discernment in the discussion. As he turned the corner, he encountered a young Vietnamese cardinal who seemed equally concerned. "Eminence, I am troubled by the direction of these elections," confided the young man. "I feel we are being dragged into a decision based on inappropriate criteria. The history of the church is full of troubled conclaves, son," Joseph responded with serenity. "But the Holy Spirit has surprising ways of working, even through our human weaknesses. Several of us, especially from the global south, feel that our voices are being marginalized." Reynolds promises much, but his words seem empty of true commitment to the poor and marginalized. Joseph listened attentively, offering only "pray with sincerity and vote according to your conscience, not out of fear or favor." Later, an anonymous document was discreetly circulating among the cardinals, analyzing Reynolds's administrative history and revealing concerning patterns in his diocesan management: favoritism toward wealthy clerics, distancing from poor communities and theological inconsistencies in his public statements. The third day of the conclave dawned with an atmosphere of expectation. Traditionally, it was at this moment that trends began to consolidate, with minor candidates withdrawing in favor of the main contenders. The third scrutiny brought the first surprise. Reynolds maintained his 47 votes, but Moretti fell to 28, while Cardinal and Tumba rose to 30. Joseph unexpectedly received 7 votes, still a small number, but a significant increase that provoked murmurs among those present. During the lunch break, the tension was palpable. Reynolds' allies showed visible irritation at the resistance encountered, while Moretti's group seemed divided on the strategy to follow. The fourth scrutiny of the afternoon brought another change. Reynolds 45 and Tumba 33, Moretti 25 and Joseph surprisingly with 12 votes. A buzz ran through the chapel. "Who's voting for the old American?" Moretti asked irritably to one of his advisors. "This complicates our negotiations with Reynolds." Reynolds, perceiving the concerning trend, intensified his articulations during the night, personally visiting influential cardinals and offering specific concessions for their regions or favorite causes. Joseph, meanwhile, remained in silent prayer in the small side chapel, apparently oblivious to the intense political negotiations occurring in the corridors. On the morning of the fourth day, a sealed envelope was found at each cardinal's place. Inside was a small, meticulously documented dossier about Joseph Miller's pastoral life, decades of silent service in poor communities, his mediation in international conflicts that had saved thousands of lives without ever seeking public recognition, his pioneering work in interreligious dialogue, even before it became an official priority of the Church. The document also revealed a fact unknown to most. Joseph spoke 12 languages fluently, including Mandarin, Arabic, and several African languages, skills acquired during his years as a missionary and informal Vatican diplomat in crisis situations. Even more impressive was the account of his theological influence. Under a pseudonym, he had written some of the most influential documents of recent decades on ecclesial reform and social justice, texts frequently cited by Reynolds and Moretti themselves in their speeches, without knowing their true authorship. "This changes everything," murmured a Brazilian cardinal to his colleague. "I thought he was just an old bishop from a provincial diocese." The fifth scrutiny that morning brought results that shocked everyone. Reynolds 38, Tumba 35, Joseph 30, Moretti 8. During the break, Reynolds approached Joseph for the first time since the beginning of the conclave. "A quite effective campaign, Eminence," he commented with a tense smile. "I didn't imagine you had such ambitions." "I don't, Thomas," Joseph responded serenely. "I didn't distribute those documents, nor did I request a single vote." "Surely you expect me to believe that," Reynolds replied with barely disguised irony. "Believe what you want, but remember, the papacy is not a prize to be won, but a cross to be carried." The climate in the conclave was becoming increasingly tense. Reynolds' supporters, seeing their candidate progressively lose strength, intensified a whispering campaign against Joseph, questioning his physical capacity, insinuating senility, and spreading doubts about his true loyalty to the tradition of the Church. During one of the breaks, Cardinal Moretti directly approached Joseph in the presence of a group of undecided cardinals. "With all due respect, Eminence, many of us question whether a man of your advanced age could bear the burden of the papacy. The constant travel, meetings that extend for hours, complex decisions that require absolute mental clarity." "A legitimate concern," Joseph responded without showing offense. "Age brings undeniable limitations." "Then you agree that it would be irresponsible for someone in your condition to assume such a position?" pressed Moretti, feeling that he had cornered his adversary. "What would be irresponsible?" Joseph responded with surprising firmness. would be to confuse physical energy with wisdom, or eloquence with discernment. Even more irresponsible would be to transform the selection of the Vicar of Christ into a popularity contest or a political negotiation. The silence that followed was profound. The cardinals present observed Joseph with new eyes, many of them noticing for the first time the intensity and clarity that emanated from this apparently fragile man. Peter was also an old man when he led the church in Rome, continued Joseph. Paul was worn out by his sufferings when he wrote his most profound epistles. The strength of the church was never in its youth or vigor, but in its fidelity to the gospel. Turning to directly face Reynolds, who had just joined the group, Joseph added, "As for international travel, Thomas, perhaps we should question whether a pope should spend so much time on planes and in hotels when his presence is so needed in Rome. As for extensive meetings, my experience suggests that truly productive meetings rarely exceed an hour. The rest is often theater and self-affirmation." Reynolds, unaccustomed to being challenged so directly, was momentarily speechless. The sixth scrutiny, held on the afternoon of the fourth day, produced results that no one could have predicted at the beginning of the conclave. Reynolds 30, Joseph 35. For the first time, the African cardinal emerged as the leader, with Joseph in second place and Reynolds falling to third position. The traditional black smoke rose over the cathedral, signaling to the faithful gathered in the square that there was not yet a new pope. Reynolds, now clearly alarmed by the trend, called an urgent meeting with his allies. "We need to react immediately," he declared. "If the votes continue migrating like this, we'll have an African pope or, God forbid, Miller." "Perhaps it's time to consider an alliance with Moretti," suggested a Spanish cardinal. "Your combined votes would still represent the greatest force." "Impossible," Reynolds responded. "He demands guarantees that I cannot offer. Besides, many of his supporters apparently are migrating to Miller." In the corridor, Cardinal Ntumba sought Joseph for a private conversation. "Eminence, I feel I must be honest with you," began the African. "I don't feel prepared for the papacy. My candidacy was mainly to give voice to the African continent in the discussions. I never imagined getting this far." "Your humility is admirable, brother," responded Joseph, "and precisely because of that, many recognize in you genuinely apostolic qualities. Many of my supporters have indicated that if I signaled, they would transfer their votes to you," continued Ntumba. "They believe your vision for the church is similar to mine, centered on the poor and the peripheries, but combined with an experience that I don't yet possess." Joseph remained silent for a moment, absorbing the implications of that conversation. "I don't seek this position, Charles. I never have. Few truly worthy of the papacy actively seek it," responded Ntumba with a smile. "It's precisely because you don't desire it that many consider you the most appropriate." On the morning of the fifth day, a different silence hung over the conclave. There was a palpable sense that this could be the decisive moment. The faces showed the fatigue of sleepless nights and intense negotiations, but also a renewed seriousness about the responsibility that weighed upon them. Before the seventh scrutiny, as per tradition, a cardinal chosen by lot offered a brief spiritual reflection. The lot fell upon a German theologian, known for his impartiality. "Brothers," he began, "we find ourselves at a moment when we must remember that we are not choosing an administrator, a diplomat, or a communicator, although these are important qualities. We are choosing a shepherd for Christ's flock. I ask that each one ask himself, who among us best personifies the humble service and fidelity to the gospel that Jesus demanded of Peter?" A contemplative silence followed his words. The cardinals prepared their ballots with renewed solemnity. The result of the seventh scrutiny was announced with a trembling voice by the scrutinizing cardinal. Reynolds 25, Ntumba 30, Joseph 62. Moretti. A murmur ran through the chapel. Joseph had received an impressive jump in votes, coming very close to the two-thirds necessary for the election. During the brief interval before the eighth scrutiny, there were not the usual frantic negotiations. Instead, many cardinals sought moments of silence and prayer. Others discreetly approached Joseph, who remained in his place, apparently absorbed in meditation. Reynolds, recognizing the inevitability of the result, finally approached Joseph. "It seems I underestimated you, Eminence," he admitted with recovered dignity. "I apologize for any disrespect." "There is nothing to forgive, Thomas," Joseph responded gently. "We are all imperfect instruments in God's hands." The eighth scrutiny was conducted in an almost solemn atmosphere. When the last cardinal deposited his ballot in the urn, a profound silence took over the chapel. The scrutinizing cardinal, with slightly trembling hands, meticulously counted each vote. "Joseph Miller," he announced, repeating the name in sequence as the votes were counted. "Joseph Miller. Joseph Miller." The final result was announced with a solemn voice. "Joseph Miller." A collective sigh echoed through the premises. More than 4/5 of the cardinals had converged on the same name, one of the largest majorities in the modern history of conclaves. The eyes turned to Joseph, who remained seated, his eyes closed in prayer. The Camerlengo approached him with the ritual question, "Acceptas ne electionem de te canonisa factum in summum pontificem?" "Do you accept your canonical election as Supreme Pontiff?" Joseph slowly opened his eyes. For a moment, it seemed he would refuse, a rare possibility but provided for in the protocol. Finally, with a clear voice that surprised many by its firmness, he responded, "Accepto, in nomine Domini." "I accept, in the name of the Lord." While Joseph was led to the room of tears to don the papal vestments, an atmosphere of reflection hung among the cardinals. Reynolds, visibly downcast but recovering his composure, commented to a close colleague, "It seems our old American cardinal had more surprises than we imagined." It was then that Cardinal Dolan of New York approached the group. "You really didn't know?" he asked with genuine surprise. "I thought Joseph's modesty was widely known, not a secret." "What exactly are you talking about?" questioned Moretti, intrigued. Joseph Miller was born Joseph Milstein, son of German Jewish immigrants who fled Nazism, explained Dolan. He converted to Catholicism during his university studies at Princeton, where he graduated with honors in philosophy before entering the seminary. The cardinals listened with growing admiration as Dolan continued. Before becoming a priest, he was one of the youngest consultants to the American State Department during the Cold War. He speaks 12 languages fluently and holds doctorates in theology, philosophy, and church history. As an unofficial nuncio, he secretly mediated some of the most delicate international conflicts of recent decades. Reynolds seemed astonished. "How did we never know this?" Joseph always believed that true influence is exercised through discreet service, not self-promotion, responded Dolan. He systematically refused authorized biographies and interviews that would highlight his accomplishments. "And what about his health?" asked a concerned cardinal. "His advanced age." "Ah, that," smiled Dolan. "Joseph walks 5 kilometers daily, practices swimming 3 times a week, and follows a rigorous dietary discipline. His doctors estimate that despite his 87 years, he has the physical constitution of a 70-year-old man. His fragile appearance is, in large part, a result of his deliberate refusal to adopt the external signs of status and comfort." At that moment, the doors opened, and Joseph returned, dressed in the traditional white papal vestments. His posture had transformed, no longer curved, but erect and dignified. His eyes, previously often lowered in humility, now revealed an intensity and clarity that commanded immediate respect. "My brothers," he spoke with a firm and warm voice, "I have chosen the name Francis II in homage to the Saint of Assisi, who was called to rebuild the Church, and to my predecessor who initiated the path of reform that I intend to continue." The traditional white smoke rose over St. Patrick's Cathedral, announcing to the world the election of the new pontiff. A crowd estimated at more than 100,000 people had gathered in the square and adjacent streets, anxiously awaiting the presentation. Inside the conclave, while preparing for the public appearance, the now Pope Francis II conversed calmly with the cardinals, including those who had been his most fervent opponents. "Thomas," he gently called Reynolds, "I hope I can count on your experience and diplomatic skills. The Church needs your qualities." Reynolds, visibly moved by the gesture of reconciliation, bowed in reverence. "Holiness, I will be at your service." "Not at my service," Francis corrected softly, "but at the service of Christ and his Church." Turning to Moretti, he added, "And I will need your energy and vision to revitalize our communication initiatives, Eminence. Your concern with the relevance of the Church in the digital world is absolutely valid." The moment of presentation to the world had arrived. The central balcony of the cathedral had been prepared with the traditional papal loggia. When the curtains opened and Francis II emerged, a momentary silence took over the crowd, followed by a deafening ovation. With simple but dignified gestures, the new pope greeted the faithful. When silence returned, he spoke into the microphone with a clear and firm voice that resonated through the square. "My dear brothers and sisters, I thank God for this moment and you for your presence and prayers. I come to you as a shepherd, not a prince, as a servant, not a sovereign." He made a significant pause, his eyes sweeping over the diverse crowd. "In a world divided by walls of indifference, prejudice, and fear, the Church is called to be a bridge of dialogue, understanding, and compassion. Our first and non-negotiable commitment must be to the poor, the marginalized, the forgotten, those whom Christ called the least among us." His voice gained strength and conviction. "I do not fear the changes necessary to better serve the gospel, nor do I cling to traditions that have lost their connection with the spiritual needs of God's people. But remember, true renewal always springs from the deep roots of our faith, not from the passing spirit of the times." Looking directly at the cameras that were broadcasting the event to billions of people around the world, he concluded, "I humbly ask for your prayers, not just for me, but for all those who serve the Church, that we may never lose sight of the essential mission entrusted to us by Christ, to be salt of the earth and light of the world, witnesses to the truth that liberates and the love that transforms." The crowd erupted in applause and acclamations, many with tears of emotion. Among the cardinals who accompanied him on the balcony, Reynolds and Moretti exchanged looks of reluctant admiration. "Perhaps we really did choose the right man after all," whispered Moretti. 6 months after the historic election, Pope Francis II had surprised the world with a series of bold initiatives that combined fidelity to tradition with openness to contemporary dialogue. In the main meeting room of the Vatican, an unprecedented press conference was underway. Francis had invited journalists from diverse religious and cultural traditions for an open dialogue about his first actions as pontiff. "Holiness," asked a CNN reporter, "many observers have noted that you have maintained advisors with diverse theological views, including those who oppose your election. Is this a deliberate strategy?" Francis smiled. "Christ did not choose identical disciples. Peter and Paul frequently disagreed. Unity does not require uniformity, but mutual respect and shared commitment to the truth." "And what about the administrative reforms?" asked an Italian journalist. You have replaced several long-standing officials. The church, as a human institution, constantly needs renewal, responded Francis. Competence and integrity are non-negotiable requirements to serve in the church's administration. But equally important is the ability to see beyond the walls of the Vatican, to understand the realities lived by ordinary faithful. In a corner of the room, Cardinal Reynolds observed with growing admiration. At his side, Moretti commented in a low voice, "Remember how we belittled him at the beginning of the conclave, how we mocked his age and apparent fragility." Reynolds nodded. A humbling reminder that appearances often deceive us. Joseph saw more clearly than all of us, even with his aged eyes. Perhaps because he looked with the heart, not just with the eyes, Moretti observed thoughtfully. After the press conference, already in his private quarters, Francis received an unexpected visit. A group of young seminarians from various parts of the world. "Holiness," timidly asked an African seminarian, "what advice would you give to those who are beginning their journey of service to the Church?" Francis reflected for a moment, his eyes revealing the wisdom accumulated over decades of ministry. "Never confuse authority with power, nor status with holiness," he finally responded. "True authority is exercised through humble service, not imposition. And the only status that matters is being a beloved child of God, a dignity shared by all humanity." Looking through the window at St. Peter's Square, where thousands of pilgrims gathered, he added, "And always remember, external appearance, whether of wealth or poverty, youth or age, eloquence or simplicity, never reveals the true value of a person. As the Lord said to Samuel, man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart." The setting sun cast a golden glow over the scene, like a silent blessing upon a new chapter in the millennial history of the Church. A chapter that had begun with the disdain of an elderly cardinal, but that now promised a renewal based on humility, wisdom, and authentic vision. The world still did not fully comprehend the transformation it was witnessing, but it was already evident that Francis II would be remembered as the Pope who had reminded the Church in the world of a timeless truth, that true greatness resides not in external appearance or social status, but in the integrity of character and the depth of commitment to the greater good. If you've come this far and this story has touched your heart, I invite you to keep this faith alive with us by subscribing to the channel and activating the notification bell so you don't miss any stories that touch the soul. And if this story has moved you, give it a like so we can continue sharing more stories like this one, made with all our hearts. Until next time.